I'd like to welcome you all here. It's lovely to have everybody here on Zoom and a few faces here face to face. Particularly want to welcome, of course, Eleanor, who's come to speak to us this evening about Swedenborg in India. Eleanor and I are on probably a couple of Facebook groups together, and this is how I first heard of it. And I thought, oh, this is an interesting subject. I think I know a few people who might be keen to hear about this. So, and Eleanor, as you all know, has got up quite early this morning to be here with us. So we'd like to say welcome to you, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say. So I'll just let you take it away.
Thank you so much, David. Yeah, this is one of my favorite topics, and I'm so excited to see so many new people here. I've given this lecture a couple of times, and every time I'm kind of like, well, maybe that this is all the people who are going to be interested in it, and then there are always more. So I'm so pleased to be here, and I'm so pleased to get an opportunity to talk about something that's really exciting for me. And this is also my grad school research. So this is one of my favorite things to information dump on. This is going to be a pretty information heavy talk, fair warning. I just wanted to open the talk with a little, with honoring Ganesha, because he is the guardian of doors and the guardian of journeys and beginnings. So Om Ganganapate Namaha. This talk is D. Gopaul Chetty and the marriage of Swedenborg and Shiva Siddhanta. And I want to open with this quote, which is going to come back a couple of times. The ignorant say that love and God are different. None know that love and God are the same. When they know that love and God are the same, they rest in God as love. And of course, I am Eleanor Schnarr. I have an MFA from the San Francisco Art Institute. I have an MA from the Graduate Theological Union and the Center for Swedenborgian Studies, from the Center of Swedenborgian Studies and the Center for Dharma Studies. I am a clerically initiated Shiva Siddhanta Swami, and I am on ordination track for the convention, the Swedenborgian Convention of North America. I'm currently working as the ministry intern at the Cambridge Swedenborg Chapel here in Massachusetts, and am very excited to see where my journey takes me next. So I want to talk a little bit about why conceptually this story matters. I was personally blessed to learn about yoga at a very young age through Brinath in college. It has been an important part of my spiritual practice all of my life. Subtle energy, interoception, chakras, auras, and meditation were all core to Swedenborg's own spiritual practice. And what I say when I mean that, it's not chakras. He uses words like energetic gyres, spirals, and this very Western type of vocabulary to describe similar phenomena, similar interoceptive energetic phenomena. So Swedenborgians love studying Hindu sacred texts, and we like to think of ourselves as pluralists, and yet hardly anything is known about actual Hindu followers of Swedenborg and their contributions to our tradition. The historical relationship between these traditions is a profound gift. The new church is not an ecclesiastical organization, rather it is a paradigm, it is a mindset which can dynamically engage and learn from wisdom traditions from all over the world, challenge normative power dynamics, and represent a radically inclusive vision of a pluralistic humanistic heaven. This is a love story between the East and West, and we get to decide how it ends. So, lesson plan, this is what we're going to go through. Actually, I'm starting my timer because we have a lot to get through. Historical context, and I'm not going to actually include every bit of this, but so I'm going to talk about the historical context, kind of what's going on. I'm going to talk about how Swedenborg can be read as an anti-colonial Christian doctrine. I'm going to talk a little bit about Shiva Siddhanta theology in its own right. Important influences on Gopaul Chetty specifically, and then India's engagement with Swedenborg, the new reformer, which you're going to find out what that is, the new light on Hindu theology, which is Chetty's book, Chetty's evangelical work, his relationship with the West, this thing called the Christo Samaj, my own field research, and then conclusion, where do we go from here? So, without further ado, who was Gopaul Chetty? He lived from 1867 to 1953. He was a lawyer, an author, a translator, a publisher, a social reformer, and a Swedenborgian. He wrote a lot in both Tamil and English, and his books are still available today, and are hopefully his main book is going to get republished soon. So this is our guy on the right, and I don't know if my my speaker box is blocking things, but so he's born in Dharma in the Madras Presidency in British India, which is today Tamil Nadu. This picture on the bottom is kind of what the landscape. It's an absolutely gorgeous, amazing, just naturally exquisite area. If people have questions, please put them in the chat, because I will be looking out for it. And on the top left, we have, this is what India looked like in 1915, so kind of during the height of this story. And all the red stuff is British areas, and then all the gray stuff are independent, like kingdoms and other things. So what did Chetty think of Swedenborg? So this is from his introduction to Swedenborg and Shiva Siddhanta. And I want to read this quote because I think it is a really healthy kind of initial point. And a lot of, we're gonna go back to the universalism of divine love a lot in this talk. And so most of my Swedenborg quotes kind of focus on that. So Chetty says, Swedenborg identifies substance with love. In other words, we are not to identify love with the abstract conceptual identity ordinarily termed substance, but rather we are to take the word substance with its whole meaning and apply it to that concrete living experience, which we know directly, immediately, and intimately as love. This doctrine, so interpreted, constitutes a new epoch in the history of philosophy. For according to it, we turn our search for reality from the world of abstract conceptions at once to the actual concrete world of living experience. In all its fullness and variety, we now call love. The whole body of Swedenborg's doctrine and the philosophy contained in it is literally an exposition of this nature of love. This is Heaven and Hell 56. Heaven is where the Lord is recognized, trusted, and loved. The different ways he is worshipped and variations that stem from the difference of activity from the one community to another do not cause harm, but bring benefit because they are a source of heaven's perfection. So let's talk about Swedenborg's humanism, Swedenborg's radical humanism. He says in the Last Judgment, those of the Gentiles who in the world had worshipped God under the human form and had led lives of charity according to their religious principles were associated with Christians in heaven, for they acknowledge and adore the Lord more than others. And he makes a lot of statements like this at the same time as being, passionately Christian, which is a really beautiful, way to. It's really beautiful to sit with that relationship of being, deeply devoted in love you know, not just God, but Christ specifically, and then, you know, use that as a window to this universalist, humanistic kind of theology. And so what is the divine human? Can it descend so-called Christianity? How can traditions of embodied divinity be distinctly one? What if the divine human is a dynamic, expansive, and sacred as humanity itself? How could it not be? And so with that kind of prologue, let's talk about like what is Shaiva Siddhanta specifically, because you can have kind of big, vague similarities, but I think when you're doing any kind of comparative theology, the interesting part, the interesting conversations really don't happen when you're saying how religions are the same. They really happen when you're saying how are they different, and that's how you get real intimacy in between traditions, is by honoring the differences and celebration of differences. So we have confirmations and conversations. So on the left, we have similarities. They're both monotheistic. And Shaiva Siddhanta in particular has this huge emphasis on the oneness of God, and then how the oneness of God allows the variety of God's expressions. That you can have many different images that you see as God when you have an understanding that unity and variety are really two sides of the same thing. There's a centrality of divine love in both traditions. They both have this love for a variety of worship, for pluralism, this dualistic non-duality, which I could give an entire talk about, but I'm not going to. Form and formlessness is something that Swedenborg talks about a lot. Three eternal verities to 3 degrees. Sacred marriages, Tantra and Hinduism love. Mythic allegory, the Dharma traditions use this phrase twilight language, which is essentially correspondential speech, and internal breathing to pranayama, which is kind of the initial thing that got me interested in this whole conversation. And what are differences? What are the conversations that we can start having? Idol worship versus scripture worship. That's a very interesting, you know, what is, if you have an image of the human body, how is that scriptural? How is putting the word on an altar the same as doing as the type of worship that happens before an image in a Hindu temple? The place of the self / the proprium is another big one, and I think that's mostly kind of more of a semantic argument that has to do with like what kind of vocabulary are you using and how are you using it when you refer to the self in positive and negative ways. Reincarnation is, of course, a big thing that's produced a lot of really interesting arguments that Swedenborg is flatly against. There are cultural and aesthetic differences. There are hegemonic, and we always have to look at how our power structure is working when we're asking these kind of questions. Guru lineages versus ecclesiastical organizations, different ways of navigating authority and power and leadership, and ancient versus modern. Of course, we have one individual's personal story from a very modern perspective, and something that is deeply integrated into an entire culture. And really, you can't separate Shaiva Siddhanta from Tamil culture because they grew up together, they developed together. And then I just included 2 examples of wall painting. This is the San Francisco Swedenborgian Church versus it's actually Vishnu, not Shiva, in Brihadeshwara Temple, which is one of my favorite temples, top 5. Let me speak. This is coming from one of the Siddhars, one of the Tamil saints. Let me speak, entwining intelligence with silence. Remain firm as long as mind can hold. I shall speak, though it is not easy, my son. See within this welding in the division, if the base of intelligence is found, the physical body becomes one of camphor. As Shiva comes to reside in his temple, he gives gathered food for us to eat. So I love this. This is a really beautiful example of Twilight language, but it's also speaking to the place of humanity in the body. On the right, we have the image of Shiva Nataraja, which is kind of the central image associated with Shaiva Siddhanta in particular. And if anyone knows where this is, give the answer in the chat. Hint, it's not in India, but there's a very interesting story behind this, this statue in particular. So where does Shaiva Siddhanta fit into world religions? So we have world religions, we have this chunk is all of the Hindus, and then Hinduism is actually all of these different traditions kind of piled on top of each other. And we can see that there's kind of a small section of Hindus are Shiva devotees or Shaivites specifically. And of course, this is messy. And then within Shaivism, we have going from early Vedic Rudra worship, you have all of these different types that split out. And so way down here, you get Tamil Shaiva Siddhanta. And so that's the tradition that we're specifically talking about. And it shouldn't be conflated with Hinduism in general, because if you talk to most people, you're going to go to Vaishnavism. You're going to go to things that derive from the Bhagavad Gita, which is a beautiful tradition that has been talked about a lot, but we're specifically talking about Shaiva Siddhanta because they're very theologically, aesthetically, and scripturally distinct. Any questions so far? Let me know.
No.
Just
keep going.
Okay. So there's two figures. If you want to know anything about Shaiva Siddhanta, there's two saints that are important for our purposes specifically. On the left is Saint Tirumular. These dates are fuzzy. Nobody. They're more kind of traditional, and it's hard to pin down exact numbers with a lot of these things because a lot of it is kind of what's culturally accepted, and we don't have a lot of hard evidence. But Saint Tirumular is the origin, the person who founded Shaiva Siddhanta, and he wrote a text called the Tirumandram. And basically everything that comes out of this tradition is referring itself back to the Tirumandram. And this is a 3,000 verse encyclopedia of Tamil spiritual knowledge. So it's part, spiritual poetry, it's part yoga text, it's part, it's a fascinating text, and people have been interpreting and reinterpreting it. So, a 1,000 years later, you get this saint, Maikanda Devar, and he's important to our story specifically. He writes a text called Shivanyana Botham, which is becomes an authoritative text of Shaiva Siddhanta, and then his disciples become kind of the next generation. So I have this quote at the bottom where Sir T.N. Shivanyanam Pillai, the ex-minister to the governments of Madras, said at a public meeting in Madras in 1925 that Swedenborg was Maikanda Devar come to life again. And this point is really important because what's happening in this story, there's kind of a conflict between is the Swedenborgian church going to spread through intentional missionaries as an ecclesiastical organization that has this kind of weird power dynamic with the church in the West, with the church in England, or is it going to be, you know, just the people who are Hindus, who continue to be Hindus, who have no interest in converting to Christianity, adopting Swedenborg as a Christian saint? And we'll see how these two dynamics kind of rub against each other and have some pretty interesting results. So this is examples of Shaiva Siddhanta today. It's still a very active tradition. So these are some of the teachers that are alive and working, and some of whom I've studied with, and I'm perfect and personally aware of. So what is Shiva Bhakta? What is love to God, flower theology, as it's called? And this is important because there's kind of this dichotomy within the Dharma tradition of, you know, the path of jnana and the path of bhakta. Is it about understanding, or is it about loving God? And Shaiva Siddhanta puts this huge emphasis on ecstatic love for God. And I think this verse from the Tirumandaram, number 325, is a perfect example of this. Mind melting in union with Shiva, honey-like experience of Shivanandam, tasting lasting bliss. The soul enjoys a pure state. Inferior are all experiences like standing, being, lying. So this is ecstasy. This is kundalini. This is you know, visionary, interoceptive, transformative experiences. We're almost at halfway, so I'm going to scooch us through the theology, but all of this is Shaiva Siddhanta theology, and I wish I had more time to talk about it. There are two people who are really important to Chetty specifically. Navalar, who was, he established a printing press to preserve Shaiva literature, and he was, I'll just read the Chetty quote. The object of his life had been to restore his mother tongue to its pristine purity and Shaiva Siddhanta to its place as one of the oldest religions in the world. The spirit he infused has not died out, and it is certain that it will live as long as the Tamil language and the Shaiva Siddhanta live. Had it not been for him, it is probable that no vestige of Shaiva Siddhanta would have been at its time left in Ceylon. So he's really important because what he does is he translates the Bible into Tamil as a way of using Christian missionary tactics against them, which is very important when you see what Chetty does. The other guy is the Reverend Scholar Sriman J.M. Swami Pillai, who sent me an invitation to meet him at Cuddalore more than 12 years ago and requested me, as he was growing old, to take up the burden of spreading Shaiva Siddhanta after him. From that day, my deep study of Shaiva Siddhanta commenced, although I have been a student of that philosophy long before. He is an amazing theologian, and I use him a lot because he wrote pretty extensively. The Brahmo Samaj is another important influence that I'm going to breeze right past because I want to get to Chetty's actual story. He was also a very, you know, intense follower of Swami Vivekananda. And there's, I'm gonna tell the story. So one of this guy, Keshav Chandra Sen, goes to England, and he goes on a speaking tour to all of these kind of alternative fringe Christian groups. He's talking to Quakers, he's talking to Universalists, he's talking to Swedenborgians, and he was close with Ani Besant in that whole scene, and he had been pretty vociferously against child marriage. And then he comes back, and almost immediately he marries his 14-year-old daughter to the Raj. And so he falls out of favor with the liberal kind of British intelligentsia that he had been with. And he shows up a couple of years later playing music for Sri Ramakrishna, who is Swami Vivekananda's guru. And then Vivekananda gets invited by the Swedenborgians, who start this World Parliament of Religions, to come and speak with them in Chicago in 1893. So all of these people are kind of talking to each other, and there's definitely a scene happening between India and the West. Here we have examples of this broader Indian Swedenborgian community. I'm not going to go through every one of these because I want to get to Chetty's actual life story, but you can see how, you know, I could give a whole lecture on each one of these, and they're all amazing people. So Chetty is publishing this this journal called The New Reformer, and I just love this poem from the front cover. Man is his own star, and the soul that can render an honest and perfect man commands all light, all influence, all fate. Nothing to him falls too early or too late. Our acts, our angels are good or ill, are fatal shadows that walk by us still. So this magazine was devoted to reason, justice, and love, and the application of these three principles to the discussion of all problems, religious, political, philosophical, and social. And in 1910, an Englishman submitted an article to the New Reformer titled Swedenborg, Seer of the North. And this kind of was a moment. So in 1917, World War I causes a paper shortage, and the British government limited the amount of paper that people could print. So the magazine had to shut down. And then in 1918, Chetty's wife dies, and he seems to have kind of an existential crisis. So in 1918, Chetty says, I began a deeper study of all the works of Swedenborg after buying them from the Swedenborg Society in India, in Mumbai. The study led me to the discovery that Swedenborg's teachings threw a flood of new light upon the Shaiva Siddhanta philosophy of the southern India, and that this teachings contained many truths which India did not at all know, and therefore translated into Tamil Swedenborg's Intercourse of the Soul and Body, and published it with copious notes and comments towards the end of 1921. So this commentary on Intercourse of the Soul and Body, which I find it really interesting, that's the book that he chose to start with, becomes very, very popular. It kind of goes viral. And so this is the Mr. V.M. Kalyanasundram Pillai, the secretary of the Shaiva Sabha of Palkata, the largest Shaiva Siddhanta society in India, was speaking of Chetty's translation and commentary on Intercourse of the Soul and Body. Indeed, the treatment of the subject is, to say the least, masterly, but it is but a consonance with the highly philosophic atmosphere in which you are moving and having your existence. Your attempt at giving a relief to our Shaiva Siddhanta philosophy by analogy to the European system is quite modern and has proved a veritable success, as it ought to. And I may add without hesitation that the best tribute we can give to the author of the treatise is and can only be spreading the same far and wide, and spread it did. So with that success, Chetty publishes this book, New Light on Indian Philosophy, or Swedenborg and Shaiva Siddhanta, in 1923. And if anyone's interested in this, I have this book on PDF. And so in the same year, Bahat, who had been the previous president, dies under sort of mysterious circumstances. He might have just had a heart attack, but he was on a train from Lahore to Rawalpindi, and by the time he got there, he was dead. So Chetty was the natural inheritor of this position. So the center of the Swedenborgian movement kind of moves from Mumbai down to Madurai, down to Madras. And Chetty starts publishing and publishing and publishing. So these are just a couple of the things that I was actually able to find pictures of. So he's talking about reincarnation. This is his translation of New Jerusalem as Heavenly Doctrines into Tamil. This is fascinating. Shaivism, the religion of the ancient Britons, which is interesting. And so he starts really pushing the evangelism. And he says in 1925, I went on a missionary tour lecturing on Swedenborg and his teachings in southern India. I met with a good deal of opposition. In one place, it even became impossible to deliver a lecture on Swedenborg. The leading man of the place, president of the Tamil Sangam there, gave me a very cold reception and thought that the people had nothing to learn from a Christian Swedenborg. But last year, the same gentleman of its own accord purchased a copy of Divine Love and Wisdom, being unable to bear the pressure of the popularity of Swedenborg's teachings. This is like the return of the prodigal son to his father's house. So he meets a lot of resistance, and then he starts like, well, he's actually talking about, he's actually making Shaiva Siddhanta look really good. So people get excited because he has this very positive approach. Oh, this is fun. As for Christians and Orthodox churches in India, I find there is some difficulty in making them read Swedenborg. So he's getting resistance from both sides. One Roman Catholic paper in Madras went to the length of prohibiting the reading of Swedenborg's works by the Roman Catholics. The Protestant missionaries are equally opposed. Some time ago, I issued an appeal to the missionaries of the Protestant churches for encouragement, but met with no response. Many of the Christians who earn their livelihood by the mere fact of their being Christians find it difficult to read Swedenborg's works in opposition to the wishes of the missionaries. And those who are not so bound are equally afraid. Hence, my work among the Christians is not so very encouraging. From the beginning of this month, I have started a new method of work among Indian Christians in Madras. There are several Christian churches in Madras, to each of which I go on Sundays with my assistant at the time the services end, and then offer translations of Swedenborg for sale at a cheaper rate. I'm glad to say that some books are in this way bought by Christians. And I love this, that he's like sneaking into church services and distributing contraband Swedenborg propaganda. So because of this dynamic, the spread of Swedenborgian thought in South India was almost entirely within Shaivite communities. Chetty worked tirelessly over the next 30 years from 1923 to his death in 1953, giving everything he possessed to the cause of the church. He distributed hundreds of copies of Swedenborg's writings in English and Tamil every year, writing, printing, and distributing thousands of original pamphlets, lecturing at colleges and temples, courting the interests of Shaiva spiritual leaders, and donating copies of his books to libraries all across South India. So we have a few quotes. It is the duty of all patriotic Shaivites to make much of the discovery made by Mr. Gopaul Chetty and appreciate the work that he has done for us. You have done a real service to the cause of our sacred religion by interpreting to them the great Swedish savant's teachings in the relationship that subsists among the three eternal deities, God, soul, and body. And no Hindu house would be full without it. So these are just quotes from people. I am indeed very thankful to you for your having sent me a copy of your excellent book. You have certainly done a real service to the country, especially to the cause of Shaiva philosophy, by publishing the said work, which I will dare say amply repay perusal. I commend this work to the public and would exhort you to bring out works of the same kind in the near future for the edification of the religiously and philosophically inclined people. I wish you success in every one of your noble attempts. The translation of Mr. Gopaul Chetty thus marks an era in the progress of the commonwealth of religions. New light upon Indian philosophy is thoughtful and well-reasoned discourse upon ultra-mundane topics. I welcome Mr. Gopaul Chetty's contribution, both for its own sake and for the possibility it suggests of inaugurating a cosmopolitan religious movement. More quotes. So this is the 250th anniversary of the birth of Emanuel Swedenborg in Madras. You can say there's like 50 people there, whole families. This was clearly a thriving community. 2 years later, still a thriving community. So then by 1953, this guy, Eric Kierpe, who is the head librarian at the Swedenborg publishers in Stockholm, so in 1943, they published an article setting forth the claim that there's widespread interest in the teachings of Swedenborg in southern India and in Italy. The renowned Swedish theologian and naturalist Emanuel Swedenborg is acknowledged by much more than 10 million Hindus in South India as their spiritual teacher, declared the prominent Swedenborg authority, Eric Kierpe, librarian at the Swedenborg publisher in Stockholm. Kierpe reported, among other things, that adherents to the highest religious caste in southern India, called the Shaiva Siddhanta, who believe in only one God, revere Swedenborg as their spiritual teacher and read his writings with great appreciation. Their interest dates from a quarter of a century ago, and the adherents number more than 10 million souls. So this like 10 million number, I don't think it's really accurate. But let's say it's 1/10 of that. And let's say that, maybe it's, this wasn't a church, but this was a meme. This was something that got really popular for a short period of time amongst this certain kind of Shaivite intelligentsia in Tamil Nadu. Chetty writes a lot about Chidambaram Temple, which is another thing that I could give a whole talk about. But I could give a whole talk about just Chidambaram Temple, but not right now. So as this thing is growing, his relationship with the church in the West gets more and more messy and more complicated. So this guy, Herbert Morris, is a wonderful resource for me because he wrote a lot. He was friends with both Bahat and Chetty, and he wrote pretty extensively about their relationship. And he says, it is more difficult to write about work that has been done by Mr. Gopaul Chetty in the south of India because it is not acknowledged or supported in any way by the conference. But such help has been given to this purely Indian movement, has been given privately and by means of grants towards the cost of some of the publications of the Swedenborg Society in Tamil. It is true Mr. Chetty is the president of the Swedenborg Society of India, of which Mr. Penn is the secretary, but the presidency is only an honorary office. Moreover, Mumbai and Madras are nearly 900 miles apart. Mr. Penn has a book room in the former, and Mr. Chetty has a separate Swedenborg Society with a book room in the later place, and the two work quite independently. So there's this tension where the church in the West wants Chetty to declare his organization an ecclesiastical organization. He wants it to look, they want it to look more like a Christian church. Chetty ends up writing this book, Jesus is God, a Philosophy of Universal Religion, and it never gets published because it's seen as so problematic. The last surviving manuscript, it actually not because I photocopied it, but the one of the only surviving manuscripts is in the archives of the Swedenborg Library in Bernardsson. And it's missing 2 chapters, which is really interesting. But Chetty thought that it was going to be this super valuable publication, but it definitely, you can see as his life goes on, he gets more and more Christian specific. And I find it really interesting because it seems like what made him popular was people seeing like positive confirmations of their own spiritual practice in a way that didn't, where the West suddenly, you know, through Swedenborg's eyes, is not demanding that people change. It's not demanding that people convert. It's they're actually able to celebrate themselves and see these traditions as something that isn't in conflict. And then he pulls this card, and it's kind of, you know, it's kind of like, yeah, well, actually, you should all be Christians. It's a little bit heartbreaking. So Chetty said in a letter to Morris, to be successful, the church must liberalize its teachings. Swedenborg did not come to add another church to the numerous churches of Christianity already existing. His church is to be universal. I am fully convinced that if his teachings are correctly interpreted and proclaimed to the world, men of all the warring creeds of the world can unite in one universal church. I am of the opinion that the East and the West can thus be brought together under the banner of one religion based on the teachings of Swedenborg. It is my earnest desire that Christos Samajas may be started throughout India, free from all the defects and inconsistencies, not only of the Orthodox Christian churches, but also of other religions of the world, for the purpose of studying the new revelations of Swedenborg in its religious aspect, as distinct from philosophical, and adopting it afterwards, so that there may be a really living universal religion in India. And it's, you know, I love the first paragraph, but the second paragraph just makes me cringe. And I think, you know, we really have to be careful about being like, you know, we're going to be a universalist sect. I think that's an oxymoron. Don't think you can be both universalists and a sect, because as soon as you say that, you're saying, you know, that universalism is a quality by which our particular sect is defined. And so I don't think this actually fixes the problem. So the Christo Samaj is of course playing off the Brahmo Samaj, which I didn't talk about because I didn't have time. But it's kind of this ongoing thing of, it's like, are we going to start something new and make it an organization? Or, you know, is the quality of being new this quality of being constantly amorphous and constantly not able to be pinned down? So in conclusion, you know, in 1947, we have the partition of India, this massive, you know, instance of social violence. Gandhi is assassinated in 1948, and then in 1953, right after this, Chetty dies. It seems like he was the most successful Swedenborgian evangelist in history. He wanted his son to take over his work, but he was working full-time for the government and could not devote any time to it in 1963. And then in 2007, there was an announcement of a new organization, Herald the New Church Life in 2007, as the first official meeting of the new church in India. A title which sharply illustrates the near total erasure of Gopaul Chetty's life's work in the West. So he was a radical, and he was, and I think maybe the church isn't too kind, and the organized church isn't too kind to radicals. Maybe added that when in 1948, Mr. Chetty was compelled by infirmity to give up his work, he was visited by a friend of the new church in this country, M.V. Patel, who was on a visit to India and who wrote us, Mr. Chetty is practically blind and his health is shattered. He is extremely poor and without any means. His widowed daughter looks after him. I pay tribute to Mr. Chetty and his daughter in that they are saintly characters of the most rare type. So I have a lot more stuff that I could talk about. You know, this question, was Swedenborg a yogi? What does it look like to address Swedenborgianism through yoga? Yoga is not a religion. However, it could be viewed to be the practical side of all religions. Yoga emphasizes no philosophical or theological beliefs, but practical experimentation, verification, and realization. It is therefore scientific in that it proposes hypotheses, the techniques of yoga, testing, practice, and recording experiences and comparison with other practitioners, just as modern scientists do. A lot of people helped me out with this research. Amazing people. Questions: what does humble, engaged universalist spirituality look like in the 20th century? how does the Swedenborgian paradigm charge us to foster mutually affirming and empowering interfaith dialogue? And with that, we're at 40 minutes and 13 seconds. I think, how do I end my screen share? Stop share there. All right, groovy, beautiful. Questions?
Thank you so much, Eleanor. I think that's just amazing what you've presented to us. I'm going to start off. My first question is, where are all these people now?
Yeah.
Do you know, or is it just like?
Well, here's what I know. Here's what I know. I spent 6 months in India, and anyone who would listen to me would talk about this research too. And when you say, do you know who Gopaul Chetty is, to a person on the street in Tiruvannamalai, a lot of people say yes. A lot of people say he was a political leader because he did start one of the he did start one of the main kind of Dravidian like socialist leftist parties, and I was talking to a sadhu, and I asked him if he knew who Swedenborg was, and he said, "Oh yeah, death meditation."
Oh.
So that's the prime, like if you talk to like actual like Shiva yogis, and you ask them like who Swedenborg, he is known as the death meditation guy, and Chetty is known as a political leader. But they're still around.
Okay. But it seems there's very few actual readers of Swedenborg there.
Yeah, I
understand what he says, you know. Yeah.
Yeah. There's also, you know, this dynamic where, you know, post-independence India, people are a lot less, you know, they're much more interested in, you know, this more almost nationalistic flavor of Hinduism, which we see today, in coming out in very toxic ways, and so there's this idea that you know we need to prove that we invented this stuff all ourselves, and so there's less of an interest in you know, certainly in setting up something like the Christo Samaj, because it's seen as a kind of almost transgressive syncretism. It's seen as culturally threatening. And I think there's definitely some legitimacy to that, but that doesn't mean, you know, stop the dialogue. That means make the dialogue more equitable, make the power situation more equal. And I think that's what we need to do if we're engaging with kind of syncretistic interfaith dialogue. It's got to be, you've got to cite your sources. You like don't just say yoga. Like, are you talking about classical yoga? Are you talking about Patanjali? Or like, where are you talking about Kriya yoga? You know where you're coming from, and know who your teachers are. And that's kind of the biggest lesson with how do we go forward with the interfaith talk. Cite your sources.
Yeah, thanks. Anybody else got any questions?
Yeah, Eleanor, has there been any suggestion that you're aware of any of the writings of Swedenborg that Chetty did in Tamil being reproduced, either say electronically?
I know people who still have the originals, but they have not been printed since Chetty died.
I wonder, you know, if it was put up in electric format, you know, electronic.
Yeah, and I actually I know Peter Devasi there. So if you go on to New Christian Bible Study, there are Tamil and Malayalam, which are very linguistically close. So you know, a large number of people who read Tamil also read Malayalam. But they're available on New Christian Bible Study, and I think they originally come from Chetty's translations, but I'm not sure.
How does the question of reincarnation versus one life only sit with the Hindus and the Swedenborgians in India? Seems to be enough to oppose them forever and a day.
Well, I think you know, again, there's confirmations and conversations, so I wrote a paper on this because I think that's a coming of age ritual in theological school, but you know, if you look at, so I'm looking at someone like Sri Ramana Maharishi. And he's like, no, reincarnation doesn't exist, because what reincarnates? You know, what is the thing that's coming back? So the question that you have to ask is what is the nature of the soul? And to me, reading Swedenborg, I see, well, the nature of the soul is love. And so the question is not, does the proprium return? Because I think the proprium is a process of existing in the world. The question is, does love return? And I don't think I don't think the cycles work the same way. But if you have linear systems and you have cyclical systems, I would actually put Swedenborgianism in between them. I would say that Swedenborgianism is a fractal system. It's both linear and repeating. And as a fractal system, what you get is the repetition of the same influx, the same spiritual communities showing up in human consciousness over and over and over and over again. And so, you know, when someone says like, oh, you're reincarnated from X, I'm saying, oh, my consciousness is connected to the same spiritual collective as this person. So the question is not, you know, does the soul return? The question is, what is the soul to do the returning?
So that's got some connection with what I've read of Swedenborg writing about reincarnation.
Yep.
And then, you know, he talks about the influx of spirits, and that really is very much what I hear you saying. The other thing that strikes me, the thing I like about reincarnation, is that it's a developmental process. Yeah. Whereas what tends to be with the mainstream Christian idea of life after death is that you stop developing. You know, they've got no sense of development. Whereas, of course, Swedenborg's sense of life after death is one that is continuous development, and that's what I like about the reincarnation. So, as you say, there's conversations.
That line between, you know, this world and the other world is kind of not quite Cartesian. You know, it's not quite a hard duality between spiritual and natural. It's a conversation, which is my favorite way to translate correspondences. It's correspondences as conversation. It's two things on different levels that are able to communicate and talk to each other. And so the natural and the spiritual world are constantly in reflection and communication. And I think when we enter into the spiritual world, we're entering into the part of ourselves that's outside of space and time. So this idea of thinking about reincarnation as like showing up again and again along a linear time path is kind of irrelevant, because time and space doesn't work that way in the spiritual world.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yes, I was wondering about near-death experiences. Do Hindus see Jesus on the other side?
I don't know. I haven't studied Hindu experiences, Hindu near-death experiences specifically. But from what I understand, you know, most people, you know, it's a light, it's a sphere of love, and then, you know, you're gonna name that whatever your brain tells you to name that, so I'd imagine that people see whatever they identify as the source of divine love and wisdom. But fun fact, so what did Swedenborg say about near-death experiences? You know, of course he says a lot, but kind of the first place that he talks about near-death experiences is in this wonderful, very obscure, unpublished essay on ecstasy, where he describes in detail how the change of the pressure between the heart and the lungs opens up a fetal shunt, or can open up a fetal shunt, which changes the way blood flow works between the heart and the brain. And he thought that this had to do with ecstatic near-death states. So Swedenborg had the idea that there is a physiological component to this. And yogis kind of do the same thing, because they're both working with breath retention. They're both working with what in yoga is called kumbhakam, what in the yoga traditions is called 12-inch breathing, what Swedenborg calls internal breathing. And all of these have to do with kind of hacking your consciousness at the moment in between life and death, and kind of teasing that out. And the research behind kind of the physiology of this is absolutely fascinating. So I'm less interested in what people name the deity that they see, and more interested in, like, you know, is Swedenborg right about this foramen ovale, this fetal shunt thing? You know, and so that would be, if I could have money to research whatever I wanted, it would be the fetal shunt thing and Swedenborg's ideas about ecstatic trances during near-death experiences.
Is that an unpublished book, is it?
What?
Is
yeah, it is. So we have Swedenborg's work on the brain that's normally titled the cerebrum, and there's one that's normally titled the cerebrum, there's one that's normally titled the brain. And he goes down to Venice in 1741 and is doing all of this anatomical research where he's copying notes from all of these anatomists from his time. And at the time, there was this huge boom in new printing technology and new dissection technology. So there was a lot of anatomical details in the brain, particularly in the structure of blood vessels and how blood flow is working on the brain, that was not available a generation before. And so Swedenborg goes down to Venice, gathers all of this research material, brings it back up, ends up staying with his cousin Linnaeus, who had just come back from a trip to the far north, where he put together a travel journal, which was one of the first kind of deliberately anti-colonialist documents, because it contained all of these complaints that the Sami people had against the Swedish king for making them be Christian. And so Swedenborg and Linnaeus are living together in like 1741 at this time, and Swedenborg starts working on his on like domain of the soul and all of this stuff. And so there's this really interesting moment that he actually submits this research to the University of Uppsala, and he gets backhanded basically by all of his natural philosophy peers and told this is mysticism, not science. So you know, he goes deeper and deeper, and he takes all of his original notes, which are known as the Venice manuscript, which show up as this work on the brain, and he ends up rewriting everything, and kind of putting everything together again. And so the first one's the cerebrum, the second one's the brain. That second copy was initially found and published, I think, in the 1920s. And And it was kind of passed around. There was at one point funding from the church to translate it, but then it was kind of, it seems like it was considered too spicy, because it's very much written as a neuropathology text. And he goes into, and this is the very end of the work on the brain. So they translated most of the second copy, got to the end, and the church refused to fund it. So this last section of the second copy of the work on the brain has hardly ever seen the light of day. It was published once in 1830. I have it. I have a copy of it, and I published it online, so that it is available to the public, and it's absolutely fascinating. And so he talks about things like mania, depression, alcoholism, febrile delirium, and there's like dozens of entries, and it's all like, this is the way that your breathing is affecting this, the way that the actual anatomy of your brain is affecting this, which is so groundbreaking. And this is stuff that like Sigmund Freud is credited for inventing 100 years later. That this idea that like, no, actually something in your brain is affecting your behavior. It's extremely anti-Cartesian, extremely bad for the power structures of the church, which want to put behavior on, good or evil. And so in a lot of ways, he's kind of putting our spiritual advancement into our own hands, because then the spiritist juices that are in, his way of describing like how he's pre-electricity, remember? So he doesn't say electricity, he says tremulations as fast as lightning. So how that these tremulations as fast as lightning incorporated into this, deeply complex, beautiful system becomes called in the Arcana the most intimate form of heaven. So he's giving our consciousness back to us in a very profound way. And if you just think about this as like simple materialistic brain location theory, and that like, oh, Swedenborg thought it was all about the physical brain, you're missing the point. He never thought it was all about the physical brain, but he was describing it in very scientific kind of anatomical terms. He needed a better language, and he understood that what scripture is the way of the brain telling its own story. And so you go back to how he speaks about kind of the evolution of scripture, and what you get is that in the most ancient church, the scripture was written on their hearts, because the first scripture, that most ancient scripture, is an embodied one. The way that we primarily, fundamentally connect to God is through our bodies. And everything else that's these texts and these stories, this mythology that we develop, comes out of that and comes out of the body. And that's really a powerful position to take if you want to do any kind of like interfaith stuff, because you can't deny that, physiologically that someone from Tamil Nadu is not that different from me. Our hearts are pumping blood the same way, our brains work the same way. And so if we can use the body as a ground, then we can engage with religion in a much more dynamic, meaningful way.
Do your tattoos have any spiritual significance?
Do my tattoos have spiritual significance? Of course, yeah. Everything is spiritual significance.
Can you explain it? Talk us through.
Just I have the Nunclicet and Trare and Intellectualiter and Arcana Fides on this arm. I have this is an Ouroboros.
Oh yeah.
And I am covered in runes. So I have a lot of the Elder Prothark on me. This hand, this is the Quenya word Thule for breath.
Oh yeah. like prana.
I have no hope, no fear here. This is I have a Tamil Om on my chest. This is a trident and then just abstract flowers that go all the way up the back of my neck. And I have Swedenborg's consciousness equation back here, which is
Lovely.
Very good.
Anything on the Mahabharata?
Do you want to say, Joe?
Have you got anything to say on the Mahabharata?
I love the Mahabharata. I think it's an ocean. It's an ocean of peace, and it's because of course the Gita comes out of the Mahabharata, and so what you're getting in the Gita is this like tiny snippet of this whole massive arc. It's also, you know, a Vaishnava text, so it's not directly in my field house, but I think it's well worth studying, and I think epic poetry is something that the world needs more of, and if you want to create epic poetry, you have to read epic poetry. So I strongly approve of anyone studying epic poetry, and I hope they study it from the original text, because the Mahabharata is an ocean of peace. It's also the most violent thing I've ever read in my life. And I've read the Silmarillion, so and I think that violence in mythology is there for a reason. You know, I would never want to kind of edit out the problematic parts of the Bible, because I think the problematic parts of the Bible are the problematic parts of ourselves. And so, you know, if you have Mahabharata levels of spiritual warfare that you're getting through, I think it's a very good text for that specifically. And like any sacred scripture, it can be misused. But I think that the cure for people misusing sacred scripture is not to cancel it, it's not to ignore it, but to engage even more deeply.
Thank you.
Eleanor,
yeah?
I want to ask you, if you said that you have put up electronically, well, I don't know how to say it, but about the brain, whatever book that Swedenborg wrote. Can you tell me the name of that and how you'd get hold of it?
Yeah, let me. It's in my Google Drive. Just give me.
What I'd say, Eleanor, is if you can email me links and things, I can distribute them to the people who are here tonight. And
yeah.
Also, if it's possible, if you're happy for me to put it in the description of the YouTube video when we publish.
Yeah.
Yeah,
of course. I'll send those over. I have them right here.
Send those to me, and I'll make sure everybody gets a copy so you can access those, Heather, and anybody else who's interested, because I'm interested in a couple of the things you mentioned. So
yeah,
to make those
available. I can share that with you right now.
And
the other thing I'd like to ask, it's basically asking the whole group. I mean, I'm not even aware that Swedenborg has been talking about breath work. Am I the only one?
That's a whole other lecture. I can talk about that next week if you guys want. But breath work was absolutely central to Swedenborg. And it's foundational. He was doing it from the time that he was a little child, and I think it was the seed for most of his research. You know, even stuff that you wouldn't think is connected to that. I think it's very deep and very important. But yeah, I'd be interested in knowing how many people are aware of it too.
Okay, well, that's one of the things I'll let you know is I've made up a short evaluation form for tonight, which I'll post around to everybody. And if you've got any ideas of things like breath work you would like to talk about for future meetings, put it down there, and I'll note those, and we may well get Eleanor back to talk about that one again another time. Clifford, you had a question, I think.
Yes, it's not a question, it's just a comment. Thank you very much for this nice presentation, Eleanor. I had read about Swami Vivekananda
Yeah.
and Sadhu Sundar Singh
Yeah.
previously. And I knew personally Peter Devasi.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know him too. He's great. I wish him all the best.
Yeah, I found your presentation very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just, this is Louis. I just wanted to say, yeah, for me to also thank you. I really enjoyed all that. And also that I find that Indian classical music, and a lot of that is worship music, it's just some of the best music in the world. It's so emotional and it's just wonderful stuff.
Well, I recommend you look up Nagashwaram, which is Tamil traditional music, which is very different. It's mostly horn and drum based. And it's so exuberant and so just amazingly joyful. And I remember living in when I was in Tamil Nadu, they do funeral processions because the whole city that I was living in is built up around a sacred mountain, and there's a road that goes all the way around it, and people walk this pathway to go around it. And so when people die, they do this funeral procession around the mountain, and everyone has this massive Nagashwaram band, and it's completely different. It's you know, the bright. It reminds me a little bit of ska. You know what that is? It's kind of Indian ska. It's very heavy on the horns. It's very heavy on like you know, loud like snare drum type drums. And it's a very different thing. So you know, classical music to what Chetty would, it's not Krishna Das. It's kind of its own thing, its own creature.
Oh, I'll check it out. Thank you.
Eleanor, can you spell the name of that like Nagashwaram music?
Oh yeah, here, I'll put it in the it means snake music.
Nagashwaram. Okay.
Naga means serpent music. So it's kind of, it's like the way that a cobra moves. And so it's kind of meant to sound like, so it's like like it's very, it's like you sound it, it's like, oh yeah, this is the theme music that every king cobra has playing in their head. Just
Okay, now you got to tell us about the alien vortex on your t-shirt.
Oh, this is my most Swedenborgian shirt. Well, it's falling apart, which is really sad, but it's glow in the dark. What's that?
Why the alien aspect to the vortex?
Because they're moon angels.
Huh?
They're moon angels. They're Swedenborg space angels.
They look like aliens.
Yeah, exactly. That's what some people call it, angels from space.
I've never heard that expression.
No, because like, so in De Coloribus, in Swedenborg's work on planets in space, where he goes on these internal visionary trips to visit the different planets, he refers to them as angels. So you have angels from the moon, you have angels from Mars, you have angels from Jupiter, etc. And what I like the most, well, and so angels move in these gyrating formations that, you know, all of heaven spins according to gyres and spirals. So we have our moon angels, and they're spinning according to spirals. And what's most amazing to say is that every one of them, not only are they glow in the dark, every one of them has a different facial expression. So you have all of these individual moon angels all gyrating in their heavenly community. That's my most sweet.
Wow. Good.
I'm going to say we'll draw a line under tonight. I'm aware that timing's getting on here in Melbourne. Thank you again, Eleanor, for joining us. It's been such an eye opener to hear what you've got to say and hear about this this movement in India.
Yeah, it's a joy to talk about, and if you guys want me to come back and talk about internal breathing, that's definitely waking up early in the morning for work.
Yeah, I dare say we might be booking you. What I will let everybody know, aside from the evaluation form that I'll send through tonight, is that our next meeting, 26th of May, is a chap by the name of Muhammad Mohideen. Is going to join us, and he's going to be talking about the significance of the Islamic pilgrimage to Mecca. I'm hoping it's going to be the first of possibly 3 talks this year on pilgrimages. I've got a friend who's currently doing the Camino Trail in Spain. I'm hoping she's going to come and talk to us too. And someone else I know who's been to the Holy Land this year, and I'm fingers crossed might also come and give a talk to us as well. So that's next month, 26th of May, back at the normal time of 7:30 for those of you who want to join us. Neville, of course, will send through information about that in due course. But look, thanks for everybody for being here and joining in. Thanks again, Eleanor. It's been fabulous having you along, and we look forward to having you back again.
Cheers. Have a good day.
All right. Thank you all. Stay well.
See ya.
Bye-bye.